A file that was never meant to be opened again. Inside it, fragments of reports, burned edges, names that don't exist anymore. Officially, MK Ultra was called a study of the human mind, a scientific project under the CIA's Technical Services Division. The public description said it was about behavior, about learning how to resist enemy interrogation. But when you peel back those layers, what's underneath isn't research. It's obsession, a race to control memory, thought, and identity itself. In 1953, the project began, funded in secret, supervised by a man named Sidney Gottlieb, the so-called black sorcerer of the CIA. He wasn't searching for knowledge. He was searching for power, the kind you could hide inside the human mind. Over 80 institutions were involved: universities, hospitals, prisons. Most of them didn't even know they were part of something bigger. Their grants were laundered through fake organizations with harmless names like the Society for Human Ecology. Students volunteered for psychological research, not realizing the drugs were hallucinogens. Inmates were promised reduced sentences in exchange for participation. And somewhere behind it all, agents took notes, quietly watching. One of the first goals was simple on paper: find a way to erase memories, to delete what a person knows and rewrite it. It was 1954 when the first successful tests were reported. And from there, the files go silent. Whole months vanish. Pages end mid-sentence. And what comes next isn't found in any open archive. This was the dawn of MKULTRA, a project born in fear and fueled by control. After the first reports of success, the research didn't stop. It multiplied. More money came in. More buildings went dark. The scientists were told to dig deeper into the mind, to find the place where a thought becomes fragile enough to break. At first, it looked like progress. Charts filled with data, signatures, stamps of approval. But if you read between the lines, it stops being science. It becomes something colder. Something that watches a human being the way a mechanic watches an engine, testing which parts can be removed before it stops running. One recovered file describes a 24-hour sensory deprivation cycle. Subjects placed in isolation tanks, suspended in warm liquid, left with no sound, no light, no sense of time. After 12 hours, most began to hallucinate. After 24, they begged to be let out. The notes from that day end with a single line: introduce suggestion while cognitive defenses are low. Then came the drugs, mixtures of LSD, barbiturates, amphetamines, each recorded in coded sequences instead of names. Some were meant to erase memories, others to create obedience through confusion. In one report, a subject was dosed for 77 consecutive days. No name is attached to the case, only a number, 83, and the word terminated. Researchers referred to them as volunteers, but many were patients in psychiatric hospitals. Others were prisoners, men already invisible to society. They were told it was therapy. It wasn't. They were data points in a secret war of the mind. There's a pattern in the memos. Every time a subject shows signs of breakdown, the final page is missing. Every time a test goes too far, the log stops mid-sentence. And in the margins, scrawled in pencil, you sometimes find the same phrase: proceed to deep erase protocol. No one knows what that meant. No one was supposed to. But across these pages, you can almost hear the echo of a question that the scientists themselves seem to forget to ask. Not can we erase a mind, but what happens when we do? Not everyone who entered the experiments came back. Some simply disappeared, not in a dramatic way. No headlines, no funerals. They just stopped existing. There are letters, dozens of them, from families asking what happened to their sons, their daughters, their brothers, and the replies are always the same: no record found. It's strange though. The same handwriting appears on multiple replies, different names, same format. It's as if one person was tasked with erasing others from history, not just the files, but the memories surrounding them. Subject 047 appears again, a small-town clerk, living an ordinary life before he volunteered. His co-workers noticed he began arriving late, then leaving early. then forgetting entire conversations he had hours before. He kept a small notebook, fragments of thoughts. A man with a scar on his hand, a door with no handle, someone watching from the mirror, and the final entry. I woke up in a room I never entered. After that, the notebook ends. Every page after is solid black, redacted. Another case, marked only as Patient C, was a nurse in a military hospital. She believed she was part of a dream study, something about REM cycles and emotional memory. But when her sessions ended, she couldn't remember her own name for nearly a week. Doctors wrote that her identity reconstruction was successful, but there's no record of what that means. Her signature appears on no form after that date. Then there's Subject 19, a university student, bright, quiet, studying psychology. He disappears halfway through the semester. His roommate files a missing persons report. Police follow a trail to a research lab, but when they arrive, the building's already been emptied. The landlord says it was rented by a company that doesn't exist, and a week later, the roommate withdraws from school. He never speaks about it again. These aren't isolated incidents. Across years of records, people vanish the same way. First from their lives, then from the paper trail, and finally from memory. It's almost as if the experiment wasn't just about erasing memories, but about erasing people who carried them. Every time you find a missing name, you wonder if that was part of the test, to see how many traces of a life could be removed before the world noticed something was missing. At first, MK Ultra looked untouchable. It had funding, protection, secrecy, everything a project like this needed to survive. But nothing built on fear stays stable forever. By the early 1960s, cracks began to show. Whispers leaked out through scientists who couldn't sleep anymore, doctors who couldn't look at their patients the same way. One technician wrote in his diary, "We're not testing drugs anymore. We're testing conscience." Inside the agency, reports started clashing. Some said the experiments were producing useful data. Others called them uncontrolled psychological collapses. Subjects suffered paranoia, amnesia, violent panic. A few developed permanent psychosis. Their identities split between who they were and who the program wanted them to be. And still, the tests went on. Now outside the labs, in bars, hotels, and city streets, people were dosed without warning, watched through one-way mirrors, their reactions documented in hidden notebooks. To them, it was just a strange night that never made sense. To the agency, it was field verification. A memo from 1961 mentions a location only called the Safe House, an apartment wired with cameras where strangers were invited in for drinks laced with hallucinogens. Agents observed from behind walls, recording every word, every movement, every breakdown. It reads like fiction, but it's signed, dated, and funded with government money. Eventually, even those inside began to question what they were part of. One psychologist refused to continue, calling the project spiritual mutilation. Another was transferred overseas and within months disappeared completely. Publicly, the agency denied everything. Privately, it panicked. The program was too deep, too dirty to expose, but too dangerous to keep running. So they did what all governments do when secrets rot from the inside. They changed the name. By 1964, MK Ultra had splintered into sub-projects: MK Search, MK Often, MK Delta, each more secretive than the last. Officially, Ultra was terminated, but the documents show funds continuing for years afterward. Different titles, same purpose. Control had collapsed, not because of exposure, but because the people who built it could no longer tell who was controlling who. When the project finally ended, at least on paper, there was no ceremony, no press release, no apology, just silence. A silence that stretched across years, covering what couldn't be explained and what should never have existed. The official story said MK Ultra had been terminated, but in 1973, most of the records were ordered destroyed. Boxes of data burned, film reels shredded, whole names erased. And so, when investigators came looking, there was nothing left to find except the people who had lived through it. A few spoke out. One was a Canadian patient who discovered her therapy sessions had been part of the program. Another was a soldier who realized his rehabilitation had been an experiment in memory implantation. They weren't believed at first. Their story sounded impossible until the fragments surfaced. In 1977, the U.S. Senate reopened the case. What they found confirmed the rumors: drugs, hypnosis, sensory control, and non-consensual testing. They called it a moral and legal failure. But even then, only a fraction of the files were recovered. Thousands of pages remained missing. Over the decades, the influence of MK Ultra lingered, quietly and visibly. Techniques for interrogation, psychological warfare, and behavior modification evolved under new names. Some became tools of defense, others tools of influence, and soon the question was no longer whether the government could control minds, but whether society could even tell when it was happening. The idea of control had escaped the laboratory. It had become cultural, digital, systemic. No longer confined to secret rooms, but encoded in algorithms, media, and memory itself. In the final surviving memo, dated 1969, a single line remains unredacted. The human mind remains the most powerful weapon ever created, and the least understood. Maybe MKULTRA never truly ended. Maybe it just changed its form, from hidden labs and syringes to the invisible architectures of the modern world. And that's the legacy it left behind. Not in files or reports, but in the quiet question that still lingers whenever we look at our own reflection. How much of what we remember is truly ours?